Well, I feel like I say this all the time because it's like going to an AA meeting, but my name is Sean and I have 2 daughters. My oldest daughter is 13, going on 50, and determined, I think, to be the President of the United States. And my youngest daughter is 10 and determined to be the White House chef. And they are, for as much as I love them, the 2 nerdiest kids on the face of the planet. Here's how I know that. Every summer when other kids are going off to like real camps where they do fun stuff, they want to go to this camp where they basically go and sit in class all day for 6 days. And it really became clear a couple of years ago when they came to my wife, Rochelle, and they said to her, "Mom, you need to know something. The vacations you plan, our vacations suck." And Rochelle was like really hurt by this. And what she said was, "What do you mean our vacations aren't very good? Look at all the places we go. We get to go to places like Breckenridge and tour Amish country. We spend weeks at lake houses." And she was also thinking, "But don't think we're not coming back to that whole suck thing you just said." And they told her what they wanted to do was have a different kind of vacation. So she asked, "Okay, where do you want to go?" And Catherine, our youngest, said, "Well, I want to go see the Alamo." And our oldest daughter said, "Well, I want to go to the Houston Museum of Natural Science because they have the Magna Carta there." And now you see, we were planning all the wrong kinds of vacations. Because we planned vacations, thinking they should be fun. And so later in the summer, she said, okay, they loaded up in the car and they went to San Antonio to visit the Alamo, and they went over to Houston to see the Magna Carta, and they absolutely loved it, which was great because I loved it. Because I realized that next summer, that going to museums is a whole lot cheaper than going to Disneyland. We can just do museums all you want to do. Let's just do that. So the next summer, what we decided to do is on our way to somewhere else, that we would stop in Memphis, Tennessee, and go to the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel. And the Lorraine Motel is where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and there's a museum there now, and it is absolutely stunning. It's one of the best museums I've ever been to in my entire life. And so we went in to this incredible museum. But I have to tell you the truth. Like the first hour and a half for me, I experienced emotions that I wasn't expecting. And it was this mix of depression and anger and rage. Because the very first exhibit when you go into the museum are statues. And there are statues all about this high of slaves in the bottom of boats, slaves from Africa. And they kind of jab you in the face with their reality, with the confused and angry and pained expressions on people's face as they rode themselves to their own bondage, under threat of death. And as I'm looking at this exhibit, walking around the first 30 minutes, it dawns on me that every one of these slaves portrayed by these statues looks like me. Their body type, their tight curly hair. They look like me and like my brother and my father, and they look like my daughters. Well, we enjoy that museum a lot, but the truth is, in that moment, I was shocked again by the reality of slavery, which shouldn't have been a surprise. Because growing up in America, particularly growing up in the South, when history got to me, we studied all sorts of other nations and cultures, but when it got to people who looked like me, it was almost all about slavery. That the only things that you're ever taught in American history about people who look like you start with slavery and it ends with Martin Luther King. And my great-grandparents are from Mississippi. And because of the legacy of slavery, my grandfather didn't finish the 3rd grade because he had to drop out and start working the family farm. And we were one of the lucky ones. We actually owned land. And it just does something to you when the telling of your story starts with slavery. But the truth is, that's not just me. I'm not the only person or from the only culture whose story is rooted in slavery. The story of our faith, the story of the Scriptures, the story of the Christian faith, is also one rooted in slavery. It's this story that the Bible calls Exodus, and what we read before was its retelling in Deuteronomy. And Exodus begins when God sends Moses to go to Pharaoh and free his people. Freedom from slavery is all of our story. But this is kind of where the screw turns in the story, because no one likes the fact that their ancestors, that their own story is rooted in slavery. And I get it. We really like to deny slavery and the existence of slavery and the fallout of slavery. No one thinks it's fun to go to the museum and look at those statues and have them look like you. And I'm not the first person to feel this way. Because by the time Jesus laces up his sandals and is walking around, he says to the Pharisees, he says, "The truth will set you free." And they say, "What are you talking about? We were never slaves." No one likes the fact that their story starts in slavery. No one wants to remember the reality of it. And that's why it's so powerful and beautiful when Moses shows up and frees the Israelite slaves. Because God doesn't like slavery either. And imagine just being one of these Israelite slaves. You've seen the Nile turn into blood, and you've seen frogs and locusts. You've seen cattle with boils. You've seen God pass over your house and strike other people's children dead. And you have walked across the sea on dry land. And what were you thinking at that point? Well, I think you're thinking, this God seems pretty lit. Those plagues were awesome. And now you're out here in the wilderness, you're out in the desert, and you don't have to make bricks all day. The man is off your back. And this new boss, this Moses guy, well, he's just gone and taken a long vacation up the mountain. We can do whatever we want to do. This new God seems pretty solid. You've waited your whole life for freedom. And your father waited, and your grandfather, and your great-grandfather all waited for freedom. So when Moses comes back down the mountain, you're ready for the Emancipation Proclamation. But he gathers you around and he says, listen, guys. We got some things to talk about. Oh, for real, Moses? Like free love and that sort of stuff? What do we do with our freedom? Yeah, something like that. But I went up the mountain and see what had happened was that God showed up and he kind of has some stuff he wants us to do. They're going to sound like rules. Rules? We just been set free. I ain't got time for no rules, Moses. We're in the desert. This is free time. Well, okay, all right. We got to have some order. How many rules are we talking about, Moses? 10. 10? We just left a bunch of rules. How about we do 5? Can we do 5? Can we agree on 5? That's half of 10. You get what you want. It's called compromise. It's the American way. Let's do that. No, it's going to need to be 10. Well, what about 7? We'll move towards you. We'll do 7. No, 10. We're going to have to stick with 10. And think about it. It makes good sense, right? Like you got 10 fingers. You got 10 toes. Perfect score. In gymnastics, you got a 10. But I'm going to tell you a secret. If you nail this first one, if you get this one, it's going to make the other 9 a whole lot easier. If you can just get this. All right, Moses. What's the first one? Okay. God says, I am the eternal. I am your true God. I led you out of Egypt where you were slaves. You are to worship no other gods before me. My presence is enough. Like, that's the first thing. That's the first one. And doesn't that sound easy to you? That sounds pretty easy to me. Just don't have any other gods. That sounds pretty doable. Like, when I was a kid, there was this television show called What's Happening? And in this episode of What's Happening, these people come through town and they're worshiping a head of lettuce. I have never in my life been tempted to worship a head of lettuce. This seems like a no-brainer. But God seems to think that at the top of the list should be worshiping no other gods. God waits to tell us not to covet and not to steal. He waits to tell us all of these things that we put so much importance on. But if you were to ask a random person to name the 10 Commandments, they probably wouldn't be able to name 5, and they certainly wouldn't name this very first one. And so maybe this God, maybe he's just an egomaniac, and he wants to make sure everything's about him. So when both of our daughters were little, I came up with this chant called Daddy is the Best. And I would sing it to them, Daddy is the best, Daddy is the best, because parenting is a propaganda war and you have to win it. And maybe that's what God is doing. This is just propaganda. And Moses says, listen, God's not in propaganda. He wants you to place him above all other gods because he is the God who brought you out of slavery. And in this life, you're going to have 2 choices, and only 2 choices. No other God or slavery. Because here's what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to fall in love one day. And it's going to be so important and so meaningful to you that you will give away your body, you will give away your convictions, you will give away your hopes and dreams if that one person will love you, and finding that and having that will become your God. And you're going to want to make money. You're going to fall in love with the illusion of financial security and wealth. And so you're going to cut corners. And you're going to tell yourself, you know what, everybody does it. It's just the way we do business, and that's going to become your God. You're going to start to think too highly of yourself, and that everything that you do and everything that you've accomplished, every opportunity that you had, is because of your own sweat and your own work. So God says, you know what, you need to take a day off because you need to know the world will go on without you. You're going to feel threatened, and you're going to lie. You're going to lie about someone. You're going to be tempted to think that your country and your preferences should come first. And God says, only I come first. And idols come in all shapes, sizes, and flags. You're going to want to do a lot of things in your life, and every one of those things wants to be your God. So God just says, don't have any other gods before me. Which sounds weird to me and sounds weird to you because you would think that God would say, there are no other gods. But God knows what we forget, that you will never lack for options to make your God. And right now, some of us have chosen other gods. Some of us are in bad relationships, and we want it so bad, we need it so bad, we deny it because we are enslaved to it. And some of us have made a political party or a politician, and we know it's despicable, but we're prideful and arrogant, and we believe that they will save us, that they will free us, so we have made them God. Some of us think that our beauty or our performance is what will deliver us into freedom, that will make our lives everything that they should be. So we're slaves to other people's opinions of us. And it really doesn't matter who it is. Many of us have chosen many things beside God to be our God, thinking that that thing will give us life. We think something else can rescue us, something else can free us, and for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, humankind has been on a quest. We want to find some other God besides God. And that's the beauty of the Ten Commandments, is that God rescues his people, he frees his people before he gives them the commandments. That the thing that you want, the freedom that you crave, that you're working so hard for, you've already gotten. And so we find this story in Deuteronomy, and Moses is having to tell the people again, because I told your parents this, and they didn't listen. They thought they could find peace and security, that they thought that they could find freedom someplace else. So we've just been walking around for a whole long time. We didn't even have to go that far, and we've still been walking around. And the thing that you want, that you're working so hard for, that you think will bring you life, you already have. So in a previous life, I was a youth minister. And one summer, my wife was in her aerobics class, and she tore her Achilles, which meant that I had these two children who were very young, and my wife basically couldn't get off the couch. And so they just had to tag along with me wherever we went for youth trips. And so that got really old really quickly. And so I just started to dump a lot of stuff. And if you're a youth minister ever, and there's something you can dump, the thing you need to dump is junior high camp. So I decided I'm not doing junior high camp. But we were living in Houston at the time, and we needed to bring them up here to Abilene. And so I said, oh, we'll drop off the baby with Grandma, and our oldest, Malia, she can come with me. And I told her we'd do whatever she wanted to do when we got to Abilene, as if that were a long list. And she said what every kid wants to do is swim in the hotel pool. Parents could save a lot of money just by going to the hotel pool. And so we came to Abilene, dropped off our youth group kids, had dinner, checked into the hotel, and spent the night at the pool. And she had just started swimming lessons then, and she wasn't all that great at it yet. And so when we were in the pool, she wanted me to hold her almost the entire time. And that's exactly what I did. But there was a point where I just got tired of holding her, and I decided I'm going to see what it is that she can do on her own. So I just let her go, but not by much, just a little. And she was still playing and splashing and having a good time until she realized that I'd taken my hand away. And then she started screaming and yelling, and I wrapped her up, and she wrapped her arms around my neck, and she goes, "Daddy, you saved me." And I thought, as sweet as that is, honey, I had you the whole time. When you open up your scriptures to the God who has freed you, when you have so many impulses to go your own way and create your own gods, remember this: our God has had you the whole time. May those with ears to hear the word of the Lord.